give you a whole picture of what it is that we need to see and understand about our experience. And so this was the flyer that was developed for this 6-week class. And for those that were with the more class, you'll see the advantage of this information and how this information is going to take us to the next level of understanding. What I want to do is I want to just go over the 6 classes with you to get a sense of where we're going. And although I see that there are people here who were not in the first class of the Moors. Am I right? I think I count a couple people that were not in the first class. For us to be able to do this, we have to be able to go back to the beginning. We have to go back to the origin of the human family in Africa. There's no way that we could ever understand this story of West Africa if we didn't go back to the origin. Because the people that are now in Ghana and Mauritania and Niger and Benin, the word is autochthonous. Autochthonous. A-U-T-O-O-C-T-H-O-N-O-U-S, autochthonous, which means that you are indigenous to the land from whence you sprang. Ghanaians did not come from Ghana. They were not born in Ghana. I'm speaking about originally. There's only one place on the planet where all human beings come from, and that is the Great Lakes region that encompassed the countries we today call Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Congo, and Southern Africa. One of the first things that we have to do is get rid of this image of the countries that I just called. We're dealing with a post-1885 Africa when we have names for the countries. Up until 1885, when the Berlin Conference took place, was when Europe had a conference and carved Africa up. Now, it's interesting because that's later going to lead to World War I and World War II and what we're facing today. However, just to be clear, the Berlin Conference, 1885, carved up Africa. It gave England, countries like Kenya, Nigeria, and Ghana, where the predominant language is English. It gave Cote d'Ivoire, Ivory Coast, Senegal, to the French. Mozambique, other countries, to the Portugal. Okay? Southern Africa wasn't in this yet. But eventually they would get Southern Africa. Cecil Rhodes was in what we today call Zimbabwe. Yesterday it was called Rhodesia. Germany had what we call Namibia today. But this conference carved these countries up. And they were carved up around economical and political, for political reasons. So that Europe could get an equal share of the wealth of Africa. Italy was left out. They said, don't touch Liberia, because Liberia has the rubber. Ain't nobody getting that. That's why Liberia stayed independent. They really weren't independent. It's just that they were not taken over by any one country because of the wealth of rubber. And then you'd have to look at the technological advancements of that time, late 1800s going into 1900, where rubber, cars and trucks, and they found the wealth of rubber. So the only other country they could get was Ethiopia. Now that's going to lead to World War II. But it's going to lead to them getting beat in the Battle of Ottawa in 1896. The Italians were beat. They don't like to talk about when they were beat. They beat them bad. They were beaten as badly by the Ethiopians in 1896 under Menelik II as the Haitians beat the French, the Spaniards, and the Americans in 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804. 1804 But I bring this up because it's important that when I say countries, that I'm saying it for another reason. I'm not so much saying it because of the geographic location. I'm calling it the country because it's larger than that. And one of the countries that's going to become important for the end of this class and next class is going to be Mauritania. It's going to become very important. And as we get into it, you'll understand what I mean. The other thing that I want to talk to you about is episodic and corrective history. To know the difference between episodic and corrective history. Episodic history takes episodes out of corrective history and teaches them. The great West African kingdoms. That's episodic. But because I've had this opportunity for 6 classes, we're going to do it correctively, where I'm going to show you some things as it relates to West Africa. Where did that great West African kingdom come from? Because when they teach episodic history, particularly like in Egypt, when they teach the dynastic period, the reason why you can get caught up in believing that aliens built the pyramids, or believing that Europeans built the pyramids and the temples and they were the original Egyptians, is because Egypt has been presented to you episodically. Because if you looked at it correctively, you couldn't understand Kemet or Egypt if you didn't understand Nubia, Tarseti, Puani, or what we today call Somalia. You couldn't understand Egypt without understanding these countries. But when they give it to you episodically in an episode, then everybody can come in and claim that they did it. See, it's psychological. So this is why the 5-part series on the Moors and the 6-part series on West Africa is so important. Because it allows us to be able to flesh out this information in a way that we can follow the trend of African existence in order to understand the whole picture. So, class number 1 today. The class question is going to deal with where are the origins of the people of West Africa. So we're going to look at the origins of life in Africa, and then we're going to end today's class with the peopling of West Africa from the Nile Valley. Our next class, which is in August, is going to deal with the nations of Dar Tichet, Dar Walata, and Dar Tangent, which are 3 settlements which we'll talk about. But to understand this now, you have to understand geology. You have to understand that the Ice Age in the polar cap, the Ice Age in the polar cap, right here, okay, that's the polar cap. That's basically the 51st parallel north. That is where the Ice Age is going to exist. It's going to start about 1.75 million years ago. But by 6,000, what is going to happen is that they had some research done on the Sphinx that said that when the Ice Age existed in the polar caps, there was heavy, heavy rains in North Africa. Very heavy rains in North Africa, to the point that the Sphinx was covered up to her head. And the reason why I say her head is because the Sphinx is the head of a woman. It's not the head of a man. And many people believe the Sphinx existed thousands of years before the pyramids existed. But that's another side story. So you're going to have heavy rains that are going to touch the ground. This is a grassland. North Africa was beautiful. Grass, hippos, giraffes. No, it wasn't a desert. But what happened about 6,000 years ago maybe 8,000 years ago, we don't know the dates for sure, is that when the Ice Age subsided and the heat of the sun began to heat the water, it destroyed the land, and dust was created that began to blow west across North Africa that created the Sahara. But there were people living in this area. So in living in this area, people made a choice. African people either traveled north or they traveled south. And what's going to happen, what we're going to see, is that the group of people that traveled south traveled to what we call southern Mauritania. And I'll show this to you as we go through these maps. But right here, this is going to be Mauritania right here. This country here is what we call Mauritania. But down in here, these Africans from Sahara are going to move down here to avoid the desert. Here, they're going to form the great kingdom. Over 400 nations, settlements are going to be in this area of southern Mauritania around 4000 BC. In southern Mauritania. They're going to develop what's called nation states. They're going to develop into a place where they create a king, queen, economic system, trading system. Eventually it's going to become a kingdom. However, what's also going to happen is that there are going to be other things that go on that's going to dismantle the effectiveness, but in fighting back against this ineffectiveness, the ancient kingdom of Ghana is going to be created in 300 AD. All black people. Well, nobody waiting for Eurasians with Islam to come in and develop universities of Sankore and in Timbuktu. They were already in existence. All they did was made it better. African people did. And the reason why the Muslim scholars of Eurasia went there was because of the history of these great schools. They went there because they knew they existed there. Did Islam add to it? Yes, it did. Islam added. Islam improved. So we're not saying they didn't improve. What we're saying is that they didn't invent it. And that becomes very important in terms of our perspective towards African people. In fact, what made Eurasians sophisticated in Islam was the African roots of Islam. Because they were nothing but a bunch of rather wild people who were sophisticated and civilized by the African nations, and then with the advent of this language that we call Afrabic or Arabic, that was given its grammar and syntax by a brother named Antara. Now this civilization, this spiritual system, now had a language, which is interesting because Islam is really one of the few religions that has a language specific to the religion. In other words, if you Chinese and you Muslim, you're going to speak Arabic. You can't worship Islam in another language. You have to speak Arabic to worship it. And that is because of the indigenous of this African language in the formation of Islam in the first place. So, here is Mauritania. And this is going to be our next class. Class number 2. Class number 3 is going to be medieval West Africa. Now this is, remember when I told you that when we did class number 4 on the Moors, I said this is what everybody came for. But we had to do class 1, 2, and 3 before you could even understand what class 4 was going to be as it related to the Moors, Africans in Europe between 710 and 1492. I said you can't even understand that if you don't understand these other 3 classes. So now what I'm saying, class number 3 is what we all celebrate during Black History. The kingdoms of Ghana, Mali, and Songhai. The kingdoms that start about 300 AD and last upwards until the 1500s with the Songhai Empire. But you need these other first two classes to understand how Ghana became so great so fast. It was already great. It just was going through turmoil. After thousands of years, it was going through turmoil. And so, to perfect the society, what the people did was take it to the next level, and by 300 AD, that's what we're going to call ancient Ghana. They're going to continue to perfect it. What's going to happen? Mali. What's going to happen after Mali? Songhai. But what you're looking at is the perfection of African scholarship and leadership in West Africa. Episodically, when they hit you with Islam, it'll throw you off. Islam did as much to build West Africa as aliens did to build Egypt. And I know there are people that may not care for that. But bring your documentation. I'm willing to adjust my thoughts. Bring your documentation, because I got mine. Class number 4, we're going to start some special focuses after that. Because now we're stabilized. After class number 3, we're stable. You understand ancient Ghana, Mali, Songhai. You understand Dar Tichet, Dar Walata, Dar Tangent. And you're going to understand how they even came to this part of the world in the first place. So class number 4 is going to be special focus. And we're going to look at the Dogon as a particular culture that's going to rise up out of West Africa. Right 200 kilometers southeast of the bend of the Niger River, you're going to have the Dogon people. And the Dogon people are going to create a view of astronomical understandings and agricultural. They're going to have a system of philosophy. So in order to just show you in a capsule sense the greatness of West Africa, I'm taking the Dogon in particular. That's going to be the special focus for class number 4. Class number 5 is a class that unites us here in the United States with all language groups. And that is the importance of the spiritual system of the Yoruba in West Nigeria. And it becomes very important. What are the connections between the Orishas of the Yoruba spiritual system and the African spiritual systems of the Caribbean? And in that, you're going to see Santeria, Voodoo, Candomblé in Brazil, Obia in the English-speaking Caribbean, and the Baptist Church in America. Because even though Baptists may not want to admit it, yeah, you black. And your entire rhythm of presentation as it relates to your spiritual system is based in an African tradition. Baptist Church is deep inside of that. And then on class number 6, I sort of kind of changed it from what I had. I wanted to look at the educational system of Timbuktu and the University of Sankore. I wanted to do something on education so that we could understand the University of Sankore, which is just a phenomenal university. And what existed in West Africa at this time. The scholars from around the world that came to this university to study or to teach. Because when you get here, now you can understand the Moors. Because this has been going on for a while. This is nothing new. Nobody was waiting for Islam. With due respect to Islam, which I have a great deal of respect for Islam, particularly the Islam of Africa, a lot of respect. And I'm not saying this disrespectfully. But what I'm saying is that black folk ain't waiting for Eurasians to come save them. Back then or today. And so that's what our 6 classes are going to be. Any questions, comments? We'll open it up to the floor for conversation. Hey, brother, how you doing?
Good. A question about the whole connection between Baptist and West African spiritual system. You know how they speak in tongues, you know, and that's Pentecostal all.
Absolutely.
And can you explain that there's a correlation? There has to be some type of correlation between them, which they don't know about. That's what has to be done.
Yeah, well, you know what is challenging to me is that they do know it, but it's so deep inside their consciousness, and they've got so much other stuff that's built over it, such as European Christianity. They don't see the Africanness of what they're doing. Do you know if those sisters, in particular, sisters are the ones that really break out in tongues? And there's a reason for that. But the purpose of my writing this book, Spirituality Before Religion, the purpose of me looking at spirituality is to free us from the anchor of white supremacy and white ignorance. Because if we really understood this spirituality and speaking in tongues, everybody in the church would understand what that person is saying. Yeah, but people just don't break out in tongues. I've seen things in Fudan where folk break out and people look at each other, ain't speaking French, and that ain't patois. So what language are they speaking? And who are they speaking to? I saw, I'm going to kind of go off here for a minute. I watched a segment of The Outer Limits, okay, which is like a science fiction show. And in this particular show, there was a young lady that was deaf. And she had an implant put in her head to hear better, a chip to hear better. But she still couldn't hear, but she was picking up voices through the chip. And there was a man that they said was psychotic that used to work at NASA, but he was fired because he was psychotic. And so now he was a janitor in the hospital where she had this operation. And so you see this man that's psychotic keep looking at her. Because mind you, he's a genius. He just got other issues he's got to deal with, okay? And he got issues. But the point that I'm making is that she was picking up voices that are all around us. But because we are so suffocated by white supremacy, we ain't picking them up. Every time our ancestors talk to us, we act like we're afraid. Because we're afraid, like I tell people, when you're in a mixed group, don't ever ask somebody, did they hear that? Or did you see that? Because your senses pick up things that other people don't. When you are in tune with nature and the cosmos, you pick things up. It's like an antenna to a radio. And it's like being at 5:30 a.m. or let's say 10:50 FM, and you complaining because you can't hear 107.5. Well, you ain't tuned to the station.
That's right.
So you ain't gonna pick it up. And what our conditions have done to us as a people is that they have retuned us to be on their frequency as opposed to being on ours.
Absolutely.
And that's the world we're living in. We're living in a world where we're trying to be at 107.5, but it keeps pulling us back to 99.2. And is my analogy making sense?
Yeah.
Because it's going back to the fact that if you're Muslim, if you're Christian, even if you're agnostic, you have the potential to pick up the original story. But because someone has retuned your dial, you're picking up someone else's story. And then wondering why, while you're praying in church, your child is selling heroin on the street. Well, you should have taken more time to understand the Africanness. Get the message of Africa in that church. So there's no new church because they all come from Africa. So when a sister break out in tongues, I don't so much listen to what she's saying. I'm trying to pick up the vibration she's presenting because it's the vibration of sound that you got to deal with. That's what rap music is. It's vibration. It's beats. That's what I learned from my son. I wasn't listening to those lovely words of Lionel Richie or Marvin Gaye or Ashford and Simpson. It wasn't about words, it's about beats, it's about vibrations. So they can curse, but they don't get caught up in the curse, they're caught up in the beat, they're caught up in the vibration. I don't necessarily care for that. I think that you can say it in a whole other way. But what I'm saying is that they're focused on the beat. They're not focused on the word. So they can curse. We pick up the curse because we know the word, but they're dealing with the beat as opposed to the word, which is what took their music, our music, off the vibration. because now we're substituting the wrong words, but for the right reasons. You see? So when we now can turn that around where our words become one with the vibration, then you got something that young black people will be in the street and they will change the whole dynamic. And I'm not talking about violence. I'm talking about action-oriented movement that change things, and even if the system won't change, they will change, and when they change, the system automatically changes. That's just fact. And we're so busy trying to change a system that's going down. You ain't gonna change the system. The system is the Frankenstein monster. I ain't got a problem with the body. I got a problem with that criminal brain that was put in it. Because if Igor had put the good brain in of the genius, instead of Igor dropped that brain, and out of fear he picked up the criminal brain, brought it back, and that's what was put into Frankenstein. That's what made it a monster. Systems aren't bad. It's the brain in the system that's bad. Our African ancestors were putting brains in systems that followed a natural path of existence. And because it was natural, it vibrated with a natural cosmic earthly venture which made everything work together. It was like a symphony. When all the instruments are in tune and harmony, you hear it, you say, wow, that sounds great. But then all of a sudden someone does something off cue with a saxophone or a violin, and all of a sudden, you can hear it because you can pick it up because the vibration says harmony goes a certain way. You can't be disharmony in harmony. Disharmony makes harmony disharmonious. If that's right. But I think you get what I said. And that's natural. When you're in a symphony and everything's going well, and all of a sudden somebody comes in with a sound that's not in harmony, everybody can pick it, or everybody should be able to pick it up. We're listening to a symphony that is out of harmony, but we've become so used to disharmony, we think disharmony is harmony. And as just a exercise.
It's just like we think right is wrong and wrong is right.
Yes.
You know, it's kind of thing. And it's like in my apartment, I have an altar. I have an altar with the candles and the incense. And sometimes I invite somebody in there, and they would walk by the altar and give it kind of a funny look, you know. What's this guy? Ain't this kind of voodoo or something stuff? But when we look at it, there's an altar practically in everybody's house from Africa. We all have maybe some special place, a wall unit or mantelpiece with pictures of our maybe grandmother, Uncle Charlie. We are decorated with some flowers and other ornaments. And sometimes when we walk by it, we may even stop and talk to it. Oh, Grandma, I miss you. What advice can you give me now? That's an altar. We don't call it that such, but it's an altar. And I tell people, you know, Africa is all around us, but we don't even know. That's Africa right there. Our stuff is all around us in our homes, and we use it every day. Yet, when brothers on the street want to take a drink, and one brother has died, and they pour before they take a drink, they pour a little bit. What's that? That's libation. They do it Africa, and they don't even know it. Our culture, I say this, slavery did not take all of Africa out of us. It's just that it buried it so deep that we don't know it's there.
And that's very important because they didn't take anything out of us. What they did is that they buried it deep down. So what we have to do, like in a storage, where you put something of value, but you put a whole bunch of other stuff in there over it, where you want to find that one piece that is so precious to you, you got to pull it all out. And sometimes it's so deep, you don't want to make the effort to have to look for it, so you say, oh, I'll look for it at another time. So that is a key. Nothing was taken out, but everything was buried deeper inside of our consciousness. And once we start pulling out all this stuff, particularly as it relates to spirituality, we would understand speaking in tongues. We would understand the minister's call and response. That's very African. You know, when the minister dances up on the thing, he's not doing an act. That's an African tradition. What the minister's doing is creating a vibration in the room. You see that, and then you see everybody else getting into it. You can see it, and then you start to speaking in the tongues, because the minister, through an African traditional way of doing ritual, takes the participants into an area where they start to go deep inside. And this is very African, and this is why you see such a difference in all religions. Any religion, you'll see a difference as it relates to culture. You'll just see it. So, this was a piece that I did on Cushion Kemet, but it also applies here. Fidelity is the truthfulness, so to speak, or how accurate a map is, and I encourage us to use the Peters projection map. The origin of the Africa and the Earth, dealing with a one continent called Pangaea, and there are different types of geological eruptions on this island. This big, huge hill, and what I want you to focus on is the Rift Valley. The Rift Valley starts in Mozambique, in southern Africa. That's why this Great Lakes region is so important to look at. Because again, before these countries are carved up, Africans created their countries or their nations as it related to natural boundaries. So you might have a river on one side and a mountain range on another, and that would become your nation. What Eurasians did when they came into Africa is that they carved up countries according to geo-economic political reasons. So, we have to talk about Mozambique, okay? And now this is Tanganyika. This is not Tanzania. The country, the continent country is Tanganyika. The reason why we call it Tanzania is because there's an island off the coast of Tanganyika called Zanzibar. It's like when we say Trinidad and Tobago. Those are two different islands, but they're considered to be one country. Okay? But two separate. So this country here is called Tanganyika, but with the island of Zanzibar that's off the coast, together, island and country, they're called Tanzania. Kenya, Uganda, going into Sudan, but here's Ethiopia, going up into the Red Sea, up into Saudi Arabia, and eventually into Israel.
So wait a minute, excuse me, where's Mozambique?
Mozambique is down here.
Okay.
See, I had to get a German book for this, but I'll go anywhere for the information. Mozambique, okay? Indian Ocean, Indischer, that's German for Indian. But here is where the Rift Valley starts, down here, comes up through Mozambique, through Malawi, Tanzania, comes across, Burundi, Uganda, comes across, continues up over through here, up through Ethiopia. This becomes a road. This is a huge rift, an opening, a canyon. Inside this huge canyon, you have the Nile Valley, or the Happy Valley. Inside the Happy Valley, you have the Nile or the Happy River.
So you say the Nile Valley is inside the Rift Valley?
Yes. Yes.
So how long does the Rift, if Nile Valley is 2,100 miles,
well,
how long is the Rift Valley?
Well, the Happy, or the Nile River, doesn't go down far south as here. It would be up here, where the Nile River starts. However, it is inside the Rift Valley. So the geological occurrence that separated the land, that created the rift. Okay? Then you have the Happy Valley, which is also a geological occurrence. And then you have the water that would come up out of the ocean that would start to go in, and it would create what we call the Happy River. Okay? And it would go up, and in Ethiopia, you're going to have the Blue Nile, that's going to be Lake Tana and the Athabara River, that's going to come down. And in Sudan, in Khartoum, Sudan, it's going to meet the Blue Nile coming out of the mountains, are going to come down so hard, it's going to hit the White Nile in Khartoum and push the Nile further north. And year by year, thousands of years, with that river, with that water flowing up and then pulling back down, it's eventually going to leave sediment, soil, and that eventually is what's going to create Egypt, or Kemet. Here's a closer look at the Great Lakes region. Tanzania, Kenya to the north of Tanzania, Uganda, you've got Burundi, Rwanda, you have parts of the Congo, and then you go down into southern Africa. Some of the oldest humans were found in South Africa. So this whole region is what we have to look at as it relates to the birth, the conception and the birth of the human family.
That's the area where Lucy was found.
Yes, Lucy was found in that area, up in this particular area, Kenya, Tanzania, but also in Tanzania you found the Laetoli footsteps, which is more evidence of the early human beings. Okay, but Lucy is not the oldest anymore. Ardipithecus is the oldest. Ardipithecus has pushed the human family back 4.6 million years. And I'm telling you right now, once we get this research done, we're going back much further.
Where was he found? Where was he found?
In South Africa. But let me hold on because my mind may not be right. But if you Google it, Ardipithecus, Google Ardipithecus, and please tell me so I can be right on camera. I don't want to say something that's not correct. But Ardipithecus was found. Ardipithecus. Ardipithecus ramidus, I believe is the name
Was he Italian?
of it.
Was he Italian? Was he
African. No, the bones were African. Found in Africa. But once we Google it, we'll get a sense of exactly physically where it was found. Great Lakes region.
Yeah.
So if Lucy would probably about 4.1, 4.2 million.
Lucy was said to be 3.5 million.
She was 3.5.
Yeah.
So this older one must be what?
Ardipithecus pushes it back 4.6, but let me tell you something else. We'll talk about it later, but there's basically 6 forms of human being. Australopithecus robustus, Australopithecus gracile, Homo habilis, Homo erectus, Homo sapiens, and Homo sapiens sapiens. Research now.
It says he lived in Eastern Africa, Middle Awash, and Ghana, G-O-N-A?
G-O-N-A, Gona.
And Ethiopia.
Ethiopia, okay. There was, Ardipithecus was found in Ethiopia. Okay. And that pushes the human family back 4.6, but let me tell you something else.
Did they say did they do some kind of anatomical studies to give a description of whether or not he was erectus or Homo sapien?
I believe what they're saying is that he belonged, or she belonged to the Australopithecines, which is the first 2 forms of the human family.
And they're distinguished in what way?
They are distinguished because, okay, Australopithecus robustus, physically, was a very thick human, very hairy, okay, short stature, and it still walked as a primate, okay? However, because of the nature of its living style, it began to do something. Because, okay, let me step back from that. Here's what science tells us. Science tells us that at one point in time, there was a common ancestor that came out of a particular age. I'm going to leave the specifics out, but basically, it was a tarsal, which is going to become a mammal, okay? And out of this, going to be in the trees. It's going to live in the trees. Long story short, they say Ramapithecus. We don't know if it's true, but I'm not saying it as it's true. I'm saying that at one point in time, pungids and hominids, pungids are the ones that lean more towards the ape, the orangutan, the chimpanzee. The humanoid is more of the one that would become the human being. But both of them at one time were the same entity up in the tree, the Ramapithecus. But for some reason, there was some Ramapithecus or Ramapitheci that came down on the ground, either because of space in the tree or whatever. But they spread across what we call Africa and the Great Lakes region. Because of their living style, they're going to have to make morphological and physiological changes. They're going to have to change. And so what's going to happen is that we as humans, we have no specialty at all. There's no reason why we need to be alive. Nature has not given us a specialty. All other animals have specialties. Okay, dogs have smell, birds have sight. We don't have, but we have three gifts. Three great gifts. We have the gift of intellect, reasoning, and language. That's what separates us. We have the ability to think. And out of this thinking, we then reason what we think and come to conclusions that help us survive. Like, you're not going to see a gorilla say, yo, what's for dinner tonight? Can we cook something? You're not going to see a dog be able to have an intellect. They have their own intelligence by nature, but they live by what we call instinct. Nature demands. Okay? When an animal such as a ewe, E-W-E, family of sheep. The female sheep is a ewe, E-W-E. The male sheep is a ram. And the baby sheep is a lamb. When they're ready to mate, the ewe, the female, gives off a scent that the male picks up and knows it's time to mate. Nature supplies the animal world with instinct, where the animal does the right thing because it's the right thing to do, period. But in our ability to have intellect, reasoning, and language, we were given the choice to say no to nature, which is good and it's bad. Because when you make the wrong choice, you pay the price. But when you make the right choice, that's called intuition. When you make the right choice in instinct, that's what makes us the masterpiece of the cosmic universe. Because in giving these gifts, we don't have a specialty. And that's why our ancestors put the head of animals on top of human bodies. They didn't worship the animal. But when they look at the bird, the falcon, they say, yo, that bird can be way up there and can spot something it wants to eat on the ground. What eyesight. I'd like to have that type of sight, that insight. The dog, smell. When you have someone like Impu, or who's called Anubis, the power of discrimination of smell. Dogs can tell when something can be eaten from the moment it can no longer be eaten. That's how strong their sense of smell is. The same way, that's why Impu is at the judgment scene. Because he's the one that can tell through discrimination whether you did it because you was the right thing or the wrong thing. You walk down the street, you see a man about to take a baby carriage and throw the baby into the middle of the street with cars. You come and you knock that man away, he falls, he hits his head and he dies. He dead. You walking down the street, you see a man with a hat on, you don't like the way the hat looks, you hit him, he falls and he dies. In both cases, the man died. But at judgment, it's Impu that's going to say, yeah, but the first time was to save that baby's life, so he did the right thing. So you're not punished for that. Your intent, exactly, was positive. But in the second sense, you just didn't like his hat, and he died. That you pay for. So what our ancestors did is that because they saw nature, they took the principles and the specialties of the animal world and placed them on humans, hoping that in doing that, that they would be symbolizing, I wish I had the insight of a bird, or the smell of a dog, or the agility of a cat, you see? And so that's why when you look at the different animals, it wasn't so much about the animal itself, but the gift. We humans don't have a gift. But our gift in intellect, reason, and logic allows us to understand everything around us. So in a sense, we're very special in that sense. However, when we come up out the trees and we're on the ground, we're making choices. When we're making choices, something's happening with the heat. And we're covered with black hair. But we start to lose hair. You know, if you look at a chimp, a chimp is pale underneath the black hair. The reason why the chimp is pale under the black hair is because the black hair is what is collecting the melanin. See, this is about science. This isn't about superiority and inferiority. If you look at a gorilla, the only thing black on a gorilla is this part of the gorilla's face, and that's because it ain't got no hair. But everything else is black. But if you look under the underarm of a gorilla is pale. It's all about science. It has nothing to do with superiority and inferiority. We look the way we look because of the nature of our survival in our environment. So as we began to lose hair, something happened. We needed a heat loss system. So our bodies began to look at developing our sweat glands. They really brought our sweat glands up. The sebaceous glands, the apocrine glands, and the acrine glands. Science now. See, this is why we have to study science. Because this is what answers the questions that we have. And the arguments that we get into with people is not emotion. Bring me your research. I'll bring you mine. This is something that we see. This is something that we know. This is what we should be teaching our young people in school.
Right. Well, he woke up when you said science.
Okay, good, good.
That's why he laughed.
So my sister, to your question, this thicker human that was hunched over, looked a little Pongidian, looked very ape-like, began to live a lifestyle where its life system made it lose weight. So its morphology began to become slimline. So out of Australopithecus gracile, only the best, see when I say I'm looking for 3 out of 100, only 3 out of 100 Australopithecus robustus was able to make the change. And so Australopithecus robustus became Australopithecus gracile, graceful, a thinner, more agile human. They lived, they ate, they began to refine their intellect, they began to make choices in their reasoning, and they began to be able to communicate with each other in a way that they began to develop a way of living that brought them up. I'm going to ask you a question, and if you can answer this question, then you understand power. If I said to you that if all your stores in your neighborhood closed, every place where you get your food, your Pathmarks, your Stop and Shops, all that closed, could you eat tonight?
Yes.
Okay, now hold on a minute. I had there was a sister who was worked in the lunchroom, in the nutritional staff. She and her sister had a little house in the Bronx with a backyard. They grew cucumbers and tomatoes. There's someone else that works on Wall Street, makes millions of dollars, lives in a beautiful condominium. That sister with the little garden in her backyard has power. But the person with all that money doesn't, because the life demands you eat. If you can eat, you can live. You have a little garden that you grow food in your backyard. Even in projects, you can grow it on your windowsill. You have power. But if the Pathmarks and all the supermarkets closed and you had no place to get your food, you ain't got no power. So what became important to the early human beings was their ability,
Hunters and gatherers.
okay, from hunters and gatherers grew agricultural science, growing different millets and growing different things. The better they ate, the better they thought, the better they thought, the better they ate. So the development of the civilization depended on agricultural science. As you understand the heavens, then you understand the earth. As you understand the earth, you then understand the things you need to eat, which then leads into biology. So there's a relationship going on here. So what happened with Australopithecus gracile is that it perfected its life system so much that it morphed into another type of human being that began to use the hands. And in using their hands, they became the tool maker. So Homo habilis is the tool maker, or the human of ability. The human of ability began to look at the world around him and her, and they began to look at growing things, and they developed their growing systems better. And as they did that, just the formation of having to do that work made them have to begin to erect their posture. You have liquid systems in your body. You have your blood, you have phlegm, you have hormones, mucus, okay? And in a body that's hunched over, you create cataracts. In other words, you create interruptions in your body, which stop the smooth flow of the liquids in your body, okay? But when you stand erect, the liquids start to flow direct. And one of the most important things is that in the base of your brain, you have something called the foramen magnum. The foramen magnum is an opening that your spinal cord goes through, right? So if you're living a life where you're a pronograde and you're looking, or orthograde, and you're looking up like this, right? There's a cataract here. There's a bend. In the bend, what happens is that it interrupts the flow of your cerebrospinal fluid, which is the liquid that bathes your central nervous system. But when you stand up straight, it opens up your foramen magnum and your spinal cord so that there's a free flow of liquids that go, and that helped the development of what we call the ventricular system in the limbic system of the brain. This is what we need to be teaching our children. That's correct. This is what they need to do. Because out of this information, they then become armed with an understanding of who they are and what they are. And this crosses cultures across the world. I'm not just talking about one, I'm talking about the human family. But because of white supremacy, this information is being denied in order to keep one group above the others for fear of what's going to happen when the group that's being oppressed finds out. That's going to be it. It's over. So Homo erectus, see, when you're like this, your psychology is you're thinking about what's in front of you. So you're constantly thinking about the present. But when you stand erect and you start looking out, you not only are thinking about the present, you are now thinking about the future. So the psychology of the human started to change also. Because when you understood the present, and you could look out into the future, you then began to look to the past. And so that's what created a time-space continuum in the human brain. So the intellect got better, the reasoning skills got better, and the language to communicate it to each other got better, and that was the development of schools.
That's a copy.
Please, brother.
So I guess that has a lot to do with that evolution of man, or the species being able to look up and wonder about the cosmos and the stars, right?
Yes.
That will go right in line with the evolution of how they now wondered about what's up there and not just what's right in front of them.
Absolutely. And see, that idea of looking up then, it dawned on them, but wait a minute, there's one thing that's up there all the time. There's one thing that's ultimate on all of us, that shines on all of us. And then they began to learn that that one thing that was up there was the cause of all life on earth. That was the sun. And then they began to realize that there was a relationship between agriculture and the sun. Certain crops grew according to the way that the sun shone. And so then they began to realize, well, wait a minute. If the crops that I'm growing are on a cycle, and if up in the heavens is a cycle, then is there a relationship between the cycle in the heavens and the cycle on the earth that will allow me to grow food better? So they said, well, let's, like, if I put this stick, this is a stick, I'm going to put the stick there. And the sun is going to shine down on that stick and create a shadow on that stick. So if the sun's over there, the shadow's going to be here. When the sun's over there, the shadow's going to be there. When the sun is over here, the shadow's going to be there. So then what they started saying, well, let's create earthly tumuli, which is what would later become pyramids. The ring tumuli would become a pyramid. Singular is tumulus. Multiple is tumuli, double I. So as this growth of looking up into the heavens and looking down, then they say, well, wait a minute, all this wonderful stuff is coming from up there. Well, if all that wonderful stuff for the cause of all the great things that are up there that happen down here, when I die, I want to go up there. And that was the creation of spirituality. But spirituality came from nature and botany, because they saw the seed, okay, planted in the womb of the earth, and then the plant grew, and then the plant aged, and then it died, and then it decayed, but then the plant came back again. Resurrection. So that was the thought process that is at the basis for our spiritual systems. You are conceived by seed and womb, and then you grow, you age, you die, you decay, and then you're resurrected. And so they said, wow. But check out the caterpillar. The caterpillar's purpose as a caterpillar, it's got one job only. Eat the proper leaves. That's all a caterpillar is supposed to do, is eat the proper leaves. Because it's the leaves that the caterpillar eats that's going to create the chrysalis or the cocoon. And so at some point in time, it eats the proper leaves, it spins the cocoon, and inside the cocoon, the caterpillar melts into a butterfly. It's no longer ground dwelling, it now flies. It no longer eats leaves, it now eats the nectars of flower. So do we wonder why our ancestors mummified bodies, wrapped them in cloth? Because that was the cocoon. So they took nature and looked at the caterpillar and said, well, symbolically, we're going to wrap our ancestors up. And out of that, they are going to go from being a ground-dwelling human into a flight-bound barbird, and they're represented by the barbird. The soul leaves the body, enters up into the heavens to join where it came from, because it said, well, if all those great things came from there to give us all this on earth, that's where I want to go back to. And so everybody say, when they say heaven, what's the first thing people do? look up there. When they look at hell, what do? They look down there. Why? Because you know, in China, when people look up at heaven, that's our hell. Because when on the other side of the earth, when they look up, that's where our down is. So it's sort of kind of ridiculous to get caught up in these tainted stories of heaven and hell as it relates to, because when you get into outer space, there is no up and down. There is no north and south. It doesn't exist. But as human beings, when you're contaminated, when your thought is contaminated, then much of what you develop is contaminated with your thoughts. That's why the first virtue was control of your thoughts, then control of your words, control of your deeds. Your thoughts are silent words. The words that you speak are verbal words, and your actions are active words. Everything goes back to the word. And our ancestors understood this. That's why they said, be careful what you call out, because you can't pull that back in your mouth. It's like when a baby come out, mama, you ain't getting back in.
Some try.
Yeah, they try, but it never worked. Here is what we're looking at for our class today. And again, episodic history would give you this first. But I have to take you to those other. See what I want us to get used to is the difference between episodic and corrective. I could have shown you this, but that would have been an episode. I had to take you back to where the human family first started, and then take you through the process. But I'm going to finish that point that you asked about Australopithecus, because I still have to go to the other forms of the human family, and I want to make sure that I respect our time, because we wrapping up at 6.
Oh no, longer.
It's all right. This comes out of Dr. Sheikh Anta Diop's work. And this shows the movement of African people from the Nile Valley. Over here is the Nile Valley. This is all the Nile Valley. It's the Nile River. Okay, as the Mediterranean is up here. And as Africans began to develop, they moved south and they moved north, but they also moved west. And that's what this map is showing us.